Peace in the Valley. Here is Elvis Presley.
Picture a two-lane road somewhere in rural Arkansas. Flat land stretching out on both sides, a water tower barely visible on the horizon, and a line of cars moving slowly, almost reverently, toward a white clapboard church that looks like it hasn't changed since the 1950s. There's no marquee out front, no billboard, no flashing arrow pointing tourists toward the parking lot. Nothing that would tell a passing stranger this place was anything other than what it appears to be, a small, quiet, ordinary house of worship at the edge of a town most people have never heard of, except for the license plates. California, Ohio, Florida, Tennessee, New York, Texas. States that have no business being represented on a Sunday morning in a church that seats 200 people in a county with a population that wouldn't fill a mid-sized arena. And yet there they are, week after week, without fail, strangers pulling off the highway, following directions they probably got from someone they met in a Facebook group or a fan forum, making their way down this unremarkable road towards something they can feel before they can fully explain. Something drew them here. Something specific. Something that has been quietly pulling people in from across the country for years now, almost entirely through word of mouth, building slowly the way real things build. Not through marketing or algorithms or viral moments, but through one person telling another person, in the hushed, slightly embarrassed tone people use when they're describing an experience they don't quite have the language for yet. And every single one of those people, if you ask them why they came, will eventually say the same name: Elvis Presley. Now, before you assume you know where this is going, stop. Because this isn't a story about an Elvis-themed tourist attraction or a tribute act or a congregation that plays his records between hymns. This is something stranger and more powerful than any of that. This is a story about a connection that runs so deep, so far back into the roots of who Elvis actually was, that understanding it changes the way you hear every song he ever recorded. It changes the way you think about his life, and it changes the way you understand his death and what he left behind. Most people who love Elvis love the version the world built around him. The leather suit, the curl of the lip, the hips that sent a generation into a panic, the comeback special, the Vegas years, the jumpsuits and the capes and the rings stacked on every finger. That Elvis is everywhere, and he always will be, preserved and packaged and presented to millions of people a year with extraordinary care. You can walk through Graceland and stand in the rooms where he lived and see the gold records and the cars and the very bed he slept in. That version of Elvis is real, and it matters, and it deserves every bit of reverence it receives. But there is another version, one that predates all of it, one that was there before the record deal, before Sun Studio, before Ed Sullivan and the screaming crowds and the machine that turned a human being into a myth. And that version, that original, foundational, deeply private version of Elvis Presley, is what people are driving to Arkansas to find. Before Elvis was a phenomenon, he was a boy. A poor, deeply feeling, spiritually alive boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, raised inside a tradition of worship so intense and so physical and so utterly consuming that it would leave a permanent mark on everything he ever did. A tradition where music wasn't entertainment, it was communion, where a congregation didn't perform songs so much as they became them, where joy and grief lived in the same breath, and everyone in the room understood that without needing it explained, because they had all felt it in the same place, in the same chest, in the same wordless part of themselves that had no other outlet. That world made Elvis. Not Memphis, not Hollywood, not Colonel Tom Parker. The church made him. The sound of it, the feeling of it, the way it opened something in him as a child that he spent the rest of his life trying to return to. And here is what makes this Arkansas church so extraordinary. It isn't simply a place that resembles that world. It isn't a congregation that has studied the tradition and reconstructed it. It is that tradition, living, breathing, unchanged, still burning with the same fire that lit Elvis Presley up from the inside when he was too young to even understand what was happening to him. And when visitors walk through those doors on a Sunday morning and the music begins, something happens to them. Something they didn't expect and can't fully account for. Something that sends more than a few of them sitting in their cars in the parking lot afterward, quiet, unable to drive, unsure of what just moved through them. They came looking for Elvis. What they found was the thing that made him who he was. Now the question, the one this entire story turns on, is why? Why this church? What is the specific, documented, undeniable connection between this small Arkansas congregation and the most famous entertainer who ever lived? Because there is one. And it goes much further than most people realize. But to understand it fully, you first have to understand something about Elvis that almost no one ever tells you. Something that changes everything. Here is a fact that stops most people cold the first time they hear it. Elvis Presley won 3 Grammy Awards in his lifetime. 3. For a man who recorded over 600 songs, who sold more than 1 billion records, who dominated popular music for 2 decades, and reshaped the entire landscape of American culture, 3 Grammys. And every single one of them was for gospel music. Not rock and roll, not pop, not the ballads that made women weep in stadium seats across the country. Gospel. Sacred music. The kind of music that doesn't ask you to dance so much as it asks you to kneel. Sit with that for a moment. Because what it tells you about Elvis Presley is something the official narrative has always managed to mention without ever really saying out loud. It tells you that the man the world crowned as the king of rock and roll considered himself, in the deepest and most private part of his identity, a vessel for something holy. That the music he made for God was the music that moved him most. That every arena show, every television appearance, every sequin jumpsuit, and every carefully choreographed moment of spectacle, all of it existed in some way downstream from a current that started in a church and never stopped flowing. Elvis didn't discover gospel music the way some artists discover a genre as a stylistic choice, an influence to be absorbed and incorporated. He was born into it, submerged in it before he had the vocabulary to describe what it was doing to him. Growing up Pentecostal in Tupelo, Mississippi, he attended the First Assembly of God Church with his parents, Vernon and Gladys, from the time he was old enough to walk through the doors. And what happened inside those walls wasn't polite or composed or contained. It was loud and physical and overwhelming. People wept openly. They raised their hands. They spoke in tongues. The music didn't fill the room so much as it replaced the air in the room, and you either surrendered to it or you spent the whole service fighting something you couldn't name. Elvis never fought it. He surrendered completely. And that surrender became the engine of everything he ever did on a stage. People who knew him in those early years, before the fame, before any of it, have described watching a young Elvis in church the way you'd describe watching a storm gather. Something happened to him when the music started. Something that wasn't performance and wasn't put on and wasn't the product of any ambition or calculation. It was purely involuntary. He didn't choose to feel it. It arrived, and he went with it every single time. And the congregation around him recognized what they were seeing because they had all felt versions of the same thing. That's what this tradition does to people. That's what it was designed to do. Now fast forward past Sun's Studio and The Ed Sullivan Show and all the years of noise and fame and pressure. Fast forward to a man in his 30s, living inside a life so large and so consuming that most of us can't even imagine it from the outside. And what do the people closest to him say? They say he never stopped. They say that in the quiet hours, after the shows, after the crowds, after the handlers and the entourage had finally gone still, Elvis would gather whoever was left and he would sing gospel music. Spontaneously. Urgently. Like a man who needed it the way other men need sleep. His longtime friend and collaborator Charlie Hodge described nights where Elvis would sit at a piano backstage and play hymns for hours. Not for an audience, not for a record, just for the feeling of it. Just to get back to something real. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this story. Because it tells you that the gospel music wasn't nostalgia for Elvis. It wasn't sentimentality or a nod to his roots. It was oxygen. It was the one place in his life where the transaction between him and the music was completely honest. Where nothing was being sold, nothing was being performed, nothing was being managed or marketed or consumed. It was just Elvis and God. And the sound. The same way it had always been in that little church in Tupelo before the world found him. And this is exactly why a church in Arkansas has become a destination for people who love him. Because the Assemblies of God tradition, the Pentecostal fire, the unrestrained worship, the music that demands your whole body and doesn't apologize for it, didn't disappear when Elvis left Tupelo. It didn't get absorbed into the mainstream or softened by success. In pockets of the American South, in small congregations that have never needed to be famous to know who they are, that tradition has continued exactly as it always was. Unchanged, uncompromised, alive in the same way it was alive when a little boy in Mississippi first felt it move through him like electricity. This Arkansas church is one of those pockets. And the people who have made the drive, the ones who walked in as fans and walked out as something harder to categorize, will tell you that the moment the music started, they understood something they had never been able to understand before. Not just about Elvis, about the source, about what was underneath every song he ever sang, every stage he ever owned, every room he ever held in the palm of his hand. They finally heard where it all came from, and it shook them to the bone. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed, and that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. There is nothing wrong with Graceland. Let's be clear about that from the start. The mansion on Elvis Presley Boulevard is a genuine monument to a genuinely extraordinary life, and the people who run it have done something remarkable, preserving the physical world of a man who became larger than any single building could contain. The jungle room with its waterfall furniture and its shag carpet ceiling, the trophy room lined floor to ceiling with gold records, the racquetball court where he played in his final years, the grave where he rests beside his mother, the woman he loved more than anything the world ever gave him. All of it is real, and all of it is worth seeing, and millions of people who have walked those rooms have left with something genuine. A closeness to the man, a sense of having touched the edges of his life in a way that photographs and documentaries can't quite replicate. But here is the question that nobody at Graceland can answer for you. Why did he weep? Not on stage. On stage, Elvis was in control, even when he appeared to be overwhelmed. But in the recording studio, during gospel sessions, people who were in the room have described moments where Elvis would finish a take and simply put his face in his hands. Not from exhaustion, not from frustration, from something that moved through him so completely that his body had no other response available. Why did a man with everything, the fame, the money, the adulation of an entire planet, find his deepest emotional release not in the music that made him famous, but in the music he made for God? Graceland shows you the life. It doesn't answer that question. It can't, because the answer isn't in a room or an artifact or a gold record mounted on a wall. The answer is in a sound. And that sound is still alive in Arkansas. Fans who have done Graceland, some of them multiple times, some of them annually, some of them who could walk those rooms blindfolded, have described a particular feeling that follows them home. Gratitude? Yes. Reverence? Absolutely. But underneath it, something quieter and harder to dismiss. A sense that the most important part of the portrait is missing, that they've seen the frame and the canvas and even the brushstrokes, but the thing the painting was actually trying to say is somehow still just out of reach. And more than a few of those people, following a tip from a fan community or a conversation with a stranger who said simply, "You need to go to this church in Arkansas," have made the drive. And come back different. One woman, a teacher from outside Memphis who had visited Graceland 11 times over the course of her adult life, more than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed, and that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video. A person for whom music and faith were the same act, the same need, the same reach towards something that had no secular equivalent. That's what Graceland cannot give you. Not because it isn't trying, but because what people are really searching for when they search for Elvis, the thing beneath the thing, was never something that could be housed in a mansion or cataloged in a museum. It was always something you could only find in a room full of people who believed the same thing, singing a real one, a significant one. The door was not closed to him. The door was standing wide open. And he walked past it every single Sunday on his way to the pulpit. Now consider the timeline. Consider the geography. Consider the strange and specific overlap between the moment one man's public story came to its sudden and shocking end, and the moment another man's quiet, faithful, unremarkable life was already underway. These are not accusations. They are observations. They are the kinds of observations that responsible people make when they are trying to understand something that does not fit neatly into the available categories. And what makes them worth making is not that they prove anything, it is that they persist. Year after year, as the Elvis conversation evolves and shifts and finds new entry points, the name Bob Joyce keeps surfacing. Not because the internet manufactured the connection, but because something about the connection refuses to go away on its own. There are people who have attended Bob Joyce's church, people who have sat in those pews, heard him sing week after week, and made their own private calculations about what they were experiencing. Most of them have never spoken publicly about it. That silence, too, is interesting. Not suspicious, but interesting. Because in a world where everyone has an opinion and a platform, the people closest to Bob Joyce have chosen, almost unanimously, to let him be what he says he is, their pastor, their community leader, a man of faith doing the work he was called to do. And maybe that is exactly what he is. Maybe the voice is a coincidence of the most staggering kind, a genetic lottery that landed twice in the same century and produced two instruments so similar that even trained professionals cannot find the seam between them. Maybe Bob Joyce is simply a gifted man who found his purpose in a church in Arkansas and never needed anything more than that. But here is what stays with you. Long after the audio comparison fades, long after the debate quiets down, long after you've made your peace with whatever conclusion feels most comfortable. Every single Sunday, Bob Joyce stands at that pulpit. He opens the hymnal. He breathes in, and then that voice, that impossible, inexplicable, world-stopping voice, fills the room again. And somewhere in the back of your mind, without your permission, a question forms. Does he know? Not whether the congregation suspects, not whether the internet is watching, but does he know, in the deepest, most private chamber of himself, exactly whose voice he is carrying, And has he chosen every single Sunday for 40 years to sing anyway? Because if that is true, then the voice was never really hidden. It was just waiting for someone to finally listen. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. Because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves drama, and the people who have followed it longest know the difference between the two. This video cannot prove that Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley. No YouTube video can. No audio comparison, however detailed, however precise, however forensically rigorous, carries the legal or scientific weight required to make that determination in any official capacity. And if you came here expecting a confession, a document, a smoking gun that closes the case once and for all, that is not what today is. That has never been what any day in this conversation has been. And pretending otherwise would be the fastest way to dishonor something that is genuinely, legitimately worth taking seriously. But here's where honesty cuts in the other direction too. The inability to prove something is not the same as the absence of something worth proving. And the fact that this question has never been settled, not definitively, not convincingly, not in a way that made the people asking it put it down and walk away, is itself one of the most remarkable features of the entire story. Elvis Presley is not an obscure figure. He is not a footnote. He is one of the most exhaustively documented human beings of the 20th century. Thousands of hours of footage, hundreds of thousands of photographs, medical records, dental records, legal filings, tax returns, family testimonies, eyewitness accounts, stretching across 3 decades of public life. The infrastructure of documentation that surrounds Elvis Presley is so vast, so layered, so deeply embedded in the official record that it should be described pulling into the parking lot of this Arkansas church on a Sunday morning and feeling, before she had even opened her car door, that she was in the right place. She couldn't explain it then, and says she still can't explain it now. She walked in, sat in the third pew from the back, and when the congregation began to sing, she was crying before the first verse was finished. Not because she was sad, because something she had been reaching toward for years, something she had driven to Graceland 11 times trying to find, was suddenly, inexplicably, right there in the room with her. That story is not unique. Versions of it have been told by enough people independently without coordination that it stops being anecdotal and starts being something worth taking seriously. And when you sit with it long enough, you begin to arrive at a thought that feels almost too intimate to say out loud, that Elvis Presley himself, the real one, the one underneath the myth, might have chosen a place like this over Graceland. Given the choice, given the freedom, given a version of his life where the machine hadn't consumed the man, where he could have simply been what he was before the world decided what he needed to be. There is ample evidence in the accounts of people who knew him well that he was never fully comfortable with what fame had made of him, that he found the spectacle exhausting in ways he could never publicly admit, that the moments that restored him, the moments where he felt most like himself, were almost always the quiet ones, the gospel sessions, the piano in the dark, the hymns sung to no one but the room. A small church in Arkansas, with its unvarnished walls and its congregation that has never needed an audience, would have understood that Elvis, would have recognized him not as a celebrity, but as one of their own, a person for whom music and faith were the same act, the same need, the same reach towards something that had no secular equivalent. That's what Graceland cannot give you. Not because it isn't trying, but because what people are really searching for when they search for Elvis, the thing beneath the thing, was never something that could be housed in a mansion or cataloged in a museum. It was always something you could only find in a room full of people who believed the same thing, singing the same song, reaching in the same direction. And now you need to know exactly what happens when you walk through those doors, because nothing quite prepares you for it. Nobody warns you about the music. That's the first thing most visitors say when they try to describe what it's like to walk into this church for the first time. They had prepared themselves for something meaningful. They're Elvis fans, after all, People who feel things deeply and aren't ashamed of it. They had driven hours, in some cases crossed multiple state lines, and they had arrived with a kind of reverent expectation. But expectation, it turns out, is no preparation at all for what actually happens when that congregation opens its mouth and begins to sing. It doesn't sound like a performance. That's the only way to say it accurately. Most music, even beautiful music, even music in a church, carries some trace of presentation, some awareness of being heard. This doesn't. This sounds like a room full of people singing because they have absolutely no choice. Like the sound is coming out of them rather than being produced by them. And the moment it fills the space, something in the air of that building changes in a way that is genuinely difficult to rationalize and impossible to dismiss. Visitors have described it as a pressure, not uncomfortable, but undeniable. Something that sits in the chest and doesn't move until the service ends, and sometimes not even then. The songs themselves are not exotic. They are the old songs, the ones that have been sung in Pentecostal churches across the American South for over a century. Songs about grace and redemption and the particular kind of longing that has no earthly object. Songs that Elvis Presley recorded in studio sessions that his musicians later described as the most emotionally charged experiences of their professional lives. And here, in this Arkansas church, those songs are sung exactly the way Elvis first heard them. Not as hymns to be observed, but as declarations to be inhabited. There is no distance between the singer and the song. They are the same thing. And this is where the specific documented connection between this congregation and Elvis Presley becomes impossible to ignore. The musical tradition alive in this church flows directly from the same Assemblies of God roots that shaped Elvis from childhood. But beyond the tradition itself, there is something more particular here. A living, human link that runs from this congregation back through decades to the culture, the sound, and the specific spiritual experience that formed him. The pastor's family carries a lineage in this tradition that stretches back to the era when Elvis was still a young man singing in church parking lots and dreaming of something he couldn't yet name. The songs sung here were sung in the same style, in the same spirit, by the same kind of congregation that gave Elvis Presley the one thing no amount of fame ever could: the feeling of being completely known and completely held at the same time. When visitors hear that, something clicks into place. Because it means this church isn't a tribute to Elvis. It isn't organized around him or marketed through him or even particularly focused on him. It is simply what it has always been: a faithful, fire-filled congregation doing exactly what it has done for generations. And the fact that what it does is the closest living thing to the spiritual experience that made Elvis who he was, that is not a coincidence manufactured for tourism. That is just the truth, preserved by people who never needed anyone famous to validate what they already knew was real. The visitors who leave this church changed aren't changed because they found a relic. They're changed because they found something alive. Something that answered without trying to. A question they had carried for years about a man they loved without fully understanding. They came in holding the myth and they left holding something closer to the man, the actual feeling, searching, deeply human man who never stopped being a poor boy from Mississippi who thought music was the same thing as prayer. Elvis Presley spent his entire adult life being the most seen person in the world and one of the least known. The distance between what the public received and what he actually was, that gap was real, and it cost him enormously, in ways that are painful to trace. But in the music he made for God, and in the tradition that made him, that gap closes. In a small church in Arkansas, on a Sunday morning, with out-of-state cars in the parking lot and strangers sitting shoulder to shoulder in wooden pews, that gap closes completely. He sold over 1 billion records. He filled every room he ever walked into. He became something the world had never seen before and has never quite seen since. And yet the place where you feel him most honestly, most completely, most truly, is here, at the end of an unmarked road. in a church most people have never heard of. Maybe that's exactly how he would have wanted it. If this story moved you even a little, don't let it end here. There are stories about Elvis Presley buried so deep that most fans will never find them, and we're bringing them to the surface, one video at a time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone who loves Elvis. The next one is worth it.